The orange, authorized personnel only sign swung back and forth after Gavin Mercer let the heavy archive room door close behind him. He didn't take a single file. He only stood there for 3 long seconds, staring at a row of dusty storage boxes with faded project numbers that nobody else in the building had looked at in years. Then he walked away before anyone could ask why a janitor had been inside. That was the first rule he'd written for himself. Never stay long enough to explain. By 7:30 that morning, Gavin was pushing a gray cleaning cart across the marble lobby of Mercer Industrial Headquarters, wearing a Navy maintenance uniform with his name stitched above the pocket. The badge hanging from his belt identified him as a contract custodian. Nothing more. No one looked twice. That was exactly the point. An hour earlier, he'd been tying the shoelaces of his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, while she struggled to balance on one foot in the tiny kitchen of their rented townhouse outside Chicago. "Dad," she said, grabbing her backpack. "Are you still cleaning that giant building today?" He smiled. "Yep. Do you like it?" He paused just long enough for her to notice. "I like having a reason to be there." Lily accepted that answer without another question. Children often knew when adults were carrying things too heavy to explain. After dropping her at school, Gavin drove 20 minutes downtown in an aging pickup truck that rattled every time he stopped at a red light. Sitting in the glove compartment was an old photograph of his late wife, Emily, laughing with windblown hair during a camping trip years before everything changed. She had died from a rare illness doctors could never fully explain. Most people accepted that. Gavin never had. For nearly 5 years, he'd chased paperwork, inspection reports, medical studies, and forgotten safety complaints that all seemed to circle back to one place. Mercer Industrial. His mother's company. Not his company. Not his inheritance. Just the place where too many unanswered questions refused to disappear. So he had made the one decision almost everyone would call insane. Instead of walking through the front entrance as Evelyn Mercer's son, he walked in through the service entrance carrying a mop. Because titles opened conference rooms. Uniforms opened doors nobody important ever noticed. Before we go any further, I'm curious. How old are you? Where are you watching from? And have you ever found yourself keeping a secret because you believed it was the only way to protect someone? The morning routine never changed. Empty trash bins. Replace restroom supplies. Sweep executive hallways before meetings began. Become invisible. Invisible people heard everything. As Gavin wiped fingerprints from the glass outside the executive conference floor, the elevator doors slid open. A woman stepped out without looking up from the tablet in her hand. She wore a charcoal suit, practical heels, and the focused expression of someone carrying an entire company on her shoulders before breakfast. Claire Whitmore, CEO. She took 3 hurried steps before coffee splashed across her sleeve. One of the paper folders tucked under her arm slipped loose, scattering several pages across the polished floor. Employees rushed past. Nobody stopped. Gavin parked his cleaning cart, knelt without saying a word, and carefully gathered every page before the air conditioning could send them drifting down the hallway. Claire finally looked at him. For just a moment, neither of them said anything. She expected to see a janitor. He hoped she would never see anything else. Neither of them realized that a simple act of picking papers off the floor had quietly begun changing both of their lives. Claire accepted the stack of papers with a quiet sigh of relief. "Thank you," she said, brushing a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. Most people would have kept walking. Gavin offered a polite shrug. Maybe they were late. A faint smile crossed her face before she hurried into the boardroom. He watched the conference room doors close, then picked up his cleaning cart and continued down the hallway without looking back. The less memorable he was, the better. That afternoon, while emptying recycling bins outside the engineering department, Gavin noticed 2 maintenance supervisors arguing in hushed voices. "The old North Ridge files are gone," one of them muttered. "They weren't supposed to be in storage anyway. You ever ask why?" "No. Around here you learn not to." The conversation ended the moment they noticed Gavin sweeping nearby. One gave him a quick nod, assuming he hadn't paid attention. They were wrong. Invisible people heard everything. Back home, Lily was already sitting at the kitchen table coloring a picture of a lighthouse when Gavin unlocked the front door. "You're late," she said. "I know. Did your giant building make you work overtime?" "A little." She studied him for a second. "You have your thinking face." "I do. The one where you forget your food gets cold." He laughed softly. "I'll try to fix that." Dinner was simple: grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Lily talked nonstop about spelling tests, playground drama, and the class hamster that somehow escaped for the third time that month. For 30 precious minutes, Gavin allowed himself to be just a father. Not a man chasing ghosts. Not Evelyn Mercer's son. Just Lily's dad. After she went to bed, he unlocked an old metal box hidden in the bedroom closet. Inside were newspaper clippings, engineering reports, medical records, handwritten notes, and one photograph of Emily wearing safety goggles at the chemical processing plant where she'd worked years earlier. Every document seemed ordinary by itself. Together, they formed a pattern no one else wanted to acknowledge. He pinned another note beside the others. North Ridge. Storage records missing. He stepped back. Still not enough. The next morning, Chicago greeted the city with crisp autumn air and a steady drizzle. Employees hurried through the revolving doors carrying umbrellas while Gavin mopped rainwater from the polished lobby floor before anyone slipped. Claire crossed the lobby carrying 2 coffees instead of 1. She slowed when she recognized him. "I figured janitors drink coffee too." Gavin looked surprised. "You don't have to do that." "I know." She handed him the smaller cup. "Consider it a thank you." He accepted it carefully. "I appreciate it." She leaned against the reception desk for a moment, something Gavin suspected she rarely allowed herself to do. "You've been here, what, 2 weeks?" "Almost. And nobody's complained." "I'm guessing that's good." "It is around here." Before he could answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and the warmth disappeared from her expression. Another crisis. Another executive demanding answers. She rubbed her forehead. "Sometimes I think people believe the CEO is supposed to solve every problem before breakfast." Gavin took a cautious sip of coffee. "My daughter thinks I can fix anything with duct tape." Claire laughed. "A useful skill. It hasn't failed me yet." For the first time that morning, she wasn't talking to an executive, an investor, or a board member. She was talking to someone who wasn't trying to impress her. Someone who listened without calculating what he might gain from the conversation. As Claire walked away, she glanced back once. Not because he was handsome. Not because she knew who he really was. Because for 5 unexpected minutes, she'd forgotten she was carrying the weight of 12,000 employees on her shoulders. Later that afternoon, Gavin received his cleaning assignments for the executive floor. Normally, contract custodians rotated between departments. Someone had changed the schedule. He was now permanently assigned to the same floor where Claire's office overlooked the Chicago skyline. It should have made his search easier. Instead, it complicated everything. The closer he came to Claire, the harder it became to remember why he'd walked into the building wearing a janitor's uniform in the first place. And somewhere inside a locked records room, answers about Emily were still waiting. Over the next several days, Gavin learned something he hadn't expected. Claire Whitmore wasn't pretending to care. Every morning she arrived before most of the executive team. Every evening, she was one of the last lights still glowing on the top floor. She remembered the names of receptionists, thanked delivery drivers, and once spent 20 minutes helping an overwhelmed intern reorganize presentation binders instead of asking someone else to do it. She also looked exhausted. The company saw confidence. Gavin saw someone carrying more weight than anyone realized. Late one afternoon, he was replacing light bulbs outside a conference room when raised voices drifted through the partially open door. "We need to postpone the safety audit," one board member insisted. Claire shook her head. "We've postponed it twice already. It isn't good timing." When is accountability ever good timing? Silence followed. A moment later, the meeting ended. Executives streamed into the hallway, talking quietly among themselves. Claire remained inside alone, rubbing her temples as she stared at financial reports spread across the table. Gavin quietly finished his work and moved on. He wasn't there to judge her. He reminded himself of that every day. He was there because somewhere inside this building, hidden beneath years of paperwork and forgotten decisions, was the truth about Emily. That evening, Lily insisted they stop for ice cream despite the chilly October weather. "You know normal people eat soup when it's cold?" Gavin teased. She grinned. "I'm not normal." No argument there. As they sat outside the neighborhood ice cream shop, Lily noticed him staring into space again. "You were thinking about Mom." He looked at her. "Was it obvious?" "You smile different when you remember her." "What kind of different?" "Like it hurts and makes you happy at the same time." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "That's probably exactly right." Lily leaned against his shoulder. Mom would have liked that lady from your work. Gavin blinked. What lady? The coffee lady. He laughed despite himself. You notice everything, don't you? I got it from you. Maybe she had. The next morning, Claire found Gavin repairing the loose wheel on his cleaning cart near the employee cafeteria. You know maintenance can replace that. It still works. You're fixing it anyway. It's cheaper. She smiled. My finance department would love you. He tightened one last bolt before standing. My dad used to say if something's worth keeping, it's worth taking care of. Claire's expression softened. My father used to say almost the opposite. Oh, if something slows you down, replace it. Which one do you believe? She didn't answer immediately. I honestly don't know anymore. Their conversation was interrupted when an elderly janitor named Frank hurried into the cafeteria carrying a cardboard box. I finally cleaned out the old basement storage room, Frank announced to the custodial crew. Found boxes nobody's touched in forever. Gavin's attention sharpened instantly. What kind of boxes? Frank shrugged. Mostly dusty engineering files from projects older than I am. Facilities says most of it will probably be shredded after inventory. For a split second, Gavin forgot to breathe. Engineering files. Old projects. Basement storage. The exact kind of records he'd spent years trying to locate. Claire noticed the change in his expression. You okay? He forced a casual smile. Yeah. But his pulse had already quickened. If Frank was right, the answers Gavin had chased for 5 years might be sitting inside forgotten boxes only one floor beneath his feet. For the first time since putting on the janitor's uniform, his mission no longer felt impossible. It felt dangerously close. And for the first time since meeting Claire, he faced a choice that had nothing to do with hidden documents. He could keep seeing her as the kind woman she'd shown herself to be. Or he could start seeing her only as the CEO, standing between him and the truth. He silently promised himself he wouldn't let those two people become the same. He had no idea how difficult keeping that promise was about to become. The basement archive smelled like cardboard, old paint, and forgotten years. Frank unlocked the metal gate with a ring of oversized keys and waved Gavin inside. Facilities wants everything labeled by Friday, the older janitor said. If a box doesn't belong to an active department, it gets documented before records management decides what stays. Gavin nodded, careful to keep his breathing steady. Rows of shelves stretched across the dim room. Every carton carried faded project numbers, dates, and department codes. Most employees would have seen clutter. Gavin saw 5 years of unanswered questions. He spent the next hour sorting broken binders, stacking unused office supplies, and dusting shelves. Exactly the way a janitor was expected to. Only when Frank left to grab more labels did Gavin allow himself a quick glance at several engineering boxes. North Ridge expansion. Environmental compliance. Hazard review. His pulse quickened. Before he could reach for another file, footsteps echoed down the concrete hallway. He immediately stepped away and returned to wiping down a metal cabinet. Claire appeared at the doorway. I thought I might find someone down here. She looked slightly embarrassed. I was looking for archived employee newsletters. Apparently nobody knows where anything is. Gavin smiled. Welcome to the basement. She laughed quietly. I've been CEO for 3 years, and somehow I've never been down here. Most people upstairs probably don't know this place exists. Claire looked around the endless shelves. Kind of feels like the building's memory. The words caught Gavin off guard. It's memory. That was exactly what he had come searching for. Claire noticed a thin layer of dust on one of the cartons and absent-mindedly brushed it away with her hand. My assistant keeps telling me we should digitize everything. You'd probably find things people forgot. Or things people hoped would stay forgotten. Their eyes met for a brief second. Neither of them realized how true that sentence really was. A call from Claire's assistant interrupted the moment. She answered, listened for a few seconds, then sighed. I'm coming. Before leaving, she looked back. Thanks for helping the other day. You already bought me coffee. I know. I figured one good deed deserved another. She smiled again before disappearing into the hallway. The room suddenly felt much quieter. Gavin waited until her footsteps faded before returning to the shelves. He carefully opened a weathered storage box marked with a project code that matched one of the notes he'd kept in Emily's case file for years. Inside were maintenance logs, inspection reports, and handwritten checklists. Nothing immediately connected to Emily. Then a folded sheet slipped from between 2 binders. The date stopped him cold. It matched the week Emily had first complained about the strange chemical odor. At work, his fingers tightened around the paper. Before he could unfold it, the basement lights flickered. A security announcement echoed through the building. Attention employees. Building security will begin routine floor inspections in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. If security found a contract janitor reading confidential engineering files, there would be questions he couldn't answer. Gavin stared at the folded document. He had spent years searching for something exactly like it. He also knew crossing one more line would make every lie he'd told that much harder to justify. After several long seconds, he slid the paper back into the folder, closed the box exactly as he'd found it, and walked away. The truth was finally within reach. For the first time, the hardest part wasn't finding it. It was deciding how much of himself he was willing to lose before he earned the right to uncover it. The folded document stayed in Gavin's mind long after he left the basement. He hadn't opened it. He hadn't slipped it into his pocket. He hadn't crossed the line he'd promised himself he would never cross. But now he knew something just as dangerous. The answers were real. They weren't buried in conspiracy theories or half-remembered conversations anymore. They were sitting inside ordinary cardboard boxes beneath the same building where executives discussed quarterly profits every morning. The next few days became an exercise in patience. Every chance he had to return to the archive disappeared beneath endless work orders. A burst pipe flooded part of the employee gym. An elevator inspection tied up half the maintenance staff. 2 janitors called in sick, leaving Gavin covering extra floors. He told himself to be grateful. Staying busy gave him less time to think about Claire. That plan lasted exactly until Thursday afternoon. She found him replacing a burned-out light fixture outside the Employee Wellness Center. "I was hoping I'd run into you." He climbed down from the ladder. "Everything okay? I need a break." He looked around the empty hallway. "I don't think I'm qualified to approve executive vacation time." She laughed. "No, I just need 5 minutes where nobody wants a decision from me." They walked to a quiet courtyard behind the building where maple leaves covered the brick path in shades of red and gold. Claire carried 2 cups of hot chocolate instead of coffee this time. "I figured the weather made the decision for us." Gavin accepted one. Lily would approve. "You talk about your daughter a lot." "She deserves it." Claire smiled into her cup. "My parents talked about business at dinner every night." "What did you talk about?" "Mostly ways to avoid talking about business." The conversation drifted naturally from favorite movies to terrible cooking experiments and childhood memories. For nearly half an hour, neither of them mentioned board meetings, maintenance schedules, or corporate strategy. It felt surprisingly normal, almost dangerous. As they stood to leave, Claire hesitated. Would Lily ever want to visit the Science Museum this weekend? Gavin blinked. "The 3 of us. If that's not strange." "It probably is." She laughed. "I was hoping you'd say that." "So why ask?" "Because strange doesn't always mean bad." For a brief moment, Gavin imagined saying yes. He pictured Lily laughing beside Claire, forgetting for one afternoon how much their lives had changed since Emily died. Then reality returned. The closer Claire became to his daughter, the greater the betrayal would be if everything fell apart. "I'll think about it," he said quietly. She accepted the answer without pressure. Fair enough. That evening, Gavin picked Lily up from soccer practice. As they drove home, she stared out the passenger window before suddenly asking, "Do you miss smiling?" He glanced at her. "What kind of question is that?" "You smile now." "I've always smiled. Not like this." He stayed silent. Lily continued watching the passing traffic. "I don't remember Mom very well anymore." His hands tightened around the steering wheel. "But I remember you smiling with her." She looked at him. "And lately, you smile a little like that again." The words followed him all night. After Lily went to bed, Gavin spread Emily's case file across the kitchen table. Medical records. Inspection reports. His handwritten timeline. Beside them sat a blank notepad. For the first time in years, he didn't spend the evening searching for new clues. Instead, he wrote one question across the top of the page. "What happens if I find the truth and lose everyone still living?" The next morning, his supervisor handed him a revised cleaning schedule. "Executive archive access this afternoon," the supervisor said. "Records management wants the basement reorganized before auditors arrive next month." Gavin stared at the paper. The archive. Again, his opportunity had returned. This time there might not be another chance. He folded the schedule into his pocket. Upstairs, Claire was preparing for another board meeting, completely unaware that the man she trusted most inside the building was about to face the hardest decision since he had walked through the service entrance wearing a janitor's uniform. He could continue pretending that keeping secrets protected people, or he could finally discover whether the truth was worth the price it was already beginning to demand. The basement was almost silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the squeak of Gavin's cart rolling across the concrete floor. Records management had left dozens of archive boxes stacked in neat rows, each waiting to be cataloged before the company's annual audit. To everyone else, it was another tedious assignment. To Gavin, it felt like standing inches away from the answer he'd spent 5 years chasing. He worked slowly. Every movement had to look ordinary. Dust a shelf. Label a box. Move another carton. Never appear curious. After nearly an hour, he reached the weathered container he had noticed before. North Ridge Expansion. The same project code. He checked the hallway. Empty. He carefully lifted the lid. Inside were maintenance reports, inspection schedules, chemical inventory sheets, and handwritten notes clipped together with rusted paper fasteners. His hand stopped on a thin incident log dated just 3 days before Emily had first complained about the strange smell at work. He unfolded it. A maintenance technician had reported repeated ventilation failures in one processing area. Temporary repairs had been approved. Permanent replacement was delayed. Reason: budget reassessment. Gavin felt the air leave his lungs. Emily had worked in that section. He turned another page. Attached behind the report was an internal memo recommending immediate shutdown until additional testing could be completed. Across the bottom corner, someone had stamped it. Pending review. The next page was missing. His heartbeat quickened. Someone hadn't simply ignored the warning. Someone had interrupted the record itself. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Gavin closed the folder instantly and slid everything back into place. A security officer walked past the storage entrance, nodded politely, and continued toward another room. Only after the footsteps disappeared did Gavin breathe again. He wasn't imagining it anymore. There really had been warnings. Whether they had caused Emily's illness remained uncertain, but someone had decided those warnings never reached their final destination. As he sealed the box, another voice surprised him. "I thought I'd find you down here." Claire stood at the doorway holding a tablet against her chest. "You've officially become the basement expert." Gavin forced a smile. "I don't know if that's something to be proud of. I was looking for old facility blueprints. They're probably somewhere in this maze." She stepped inside, looking around the endless shelves. "I keep thinking this company has 2 versions of itself." "What do you mean?" "The one everyone sees upstairs." She glanced toward the dusty boxes. "And the one hidden down here." Gavin looked at the shelves. "Sometimes old buildings remember things people don't." Claire studied him. "You say things that don't sound like a janitor." The sentence landed harder than she intended. For a fraction of a second, Gavin wondered if this was the moment. He could tell her everything. Who he really was. Why he had come. What Emily meant to him. Instead, he smiled faintly. "My wife used to say I overthought everything." Claire's expression softened. "You've mentioned her before." "Not enough." "I'm sorry." "So am I." Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. Claire finally broke. Would you ever tell me about her?" Gavin looked at the woman standing only a few feet away. She wasn't asking as a CEO. She wasn't gathering information. She simply wanted to know the person behind the uniform. Every instinct told him this was the moment to stop building a relationship on half-truths. He opened his mouth. Then his phone vibrated. A message from Lily's school. She had developed a fever and needed to be picked up immediately. "I have to go." Claire nodded without hesitation. "Your daughter?" "Yeah. Go. Don't worry about this place." He thanked her and hurried upstairs. An hour later, Lily was asleep on the couch beneath her favorite blanket, her forehead warm but already beginning to cool after medicine. Gavin sat beside her with the copied notes he'd managed to write from memory before leaving the basement. He hadn't taken a single company document, only his own observations. Yet even that felt like another secret piling on top of the others. His eyes drifted toward a framed photograph of Emily holding newborn Lily in the hospital. "I'm getting closer," he whispered. "But I don't know if I'm becoming someone you'd recognize." Outside, autumn rain tapped softly against the living room window. Across the city, Claire stood alone in her office, absent-mindedly looking at the maintenance request she'd almost signed without reading. She caught herself thinking about Gavin. Not the janitor. the widowed father who carried grief with remarkable gentleness. Neither of them realized that the distance between them had quietly become much smaller. And because of that, the truth waiting beneath the company would soon become far more painful than either one was prepared to face. Lily was back in school 2 days later. The fever had passed, but Gavin couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that his time was running out. The maintenance report he had copied into his notebook changed everything. Someone had documented a dangerous ventilation failure. Someone had recommended shutting the area down. And somewhere between that recommendation and reality, an entire page had disappeared. On Monday morning, he returned to Mercer Industrial before sunrise. The executive floor was still quiet. Only cleaning crews, security officers, and a handful of early employees moved through the building. As Gavin emptied recycling bins outside Claire's office, her assistant stepped out carrying 3 heavy binders. "Perfect timing," she said with relief. "Could you help me take these to records?" Of course. The trip back to the archive was completely legitimate this time. No sneaking. No pretending. Just another routine task. After leaving the binders, Gavin noticed one familiar storage shelf had been partially emptied. Several archive boxes now sat on a rolling cart, marked for legal review. His stomach tightened. Someone else had started looking. Before he could study the labels, voices echoed around the corner. The reporter already filed another records request. "We'll let legal handle it. If they find those maintenance logs." The conversation stopped as 2 executives noticed Gavin walking toward them with an empty hand truck. Neither paid much attention to him. One simply held the hallway door open. "Thanks." Gavin nodded politely and continued walking. Invisible again. But this time he had heard enough to know something outside the company was changing. A reporter. Public records requests. Someone besides him was asking questions. That afternoon, Claire asked if he could help carry several boxes from her office to a storage room while renovations were being planned. As they worked side by side, she seemed quieter than usual. "You ever get the feeling something's happening around you that nobody will explain?" she asked. He looked up. "Every family has secrets." "I wasn't talking about families." "No, you weren't." She folded another file into a cardboard box. "My general counsel keeps canceling meetings at the last minute. The board suddenly wants copies of project records from more than 10 years ago, and every time I ask why, someone changes the subject." She stopped taping the box. "I hate not knowing what's going on inside my own company." The words hit Gavin harder than she realized. She wasn't hiding the truth. She was being kept away from it, just as he had been. For the first time, he seriously considered telling her everything. Not because he needed help, because she deserved the truth. He imagined saying the words, "My name isn't just Gavin Mercer. Evelyn Mercer is my mother. I've been searching for answers about Emily since before you became CEO. I've lied to you every day we've known each other." His heart pounded. Claire looked up from the box. "What?" Before he could continue, her office phone rang. She answered. Her expression changed almost immediately. "I'll be there." She hung up slowly. The board called an emergency meeting. She forced an apologetic smile. "I guess our conversation has to wait." "It usually does." She looked at him carefully. "Was there something you wanted to tell me?" Gavin stared at her. This was the second time he had stood on the edge of the truth. The second time he had been given a chance to stop building their friendship on silence. He thought about Emily. He thought about Lily. He thought about the missing page. Then he made the same mistake again. "No," he said quietly. "It can wait." Claire nodded and disappeared toward the executive conference room. The words echoed in Gavin's head long after she was gone. It can wait. Except the truth had already waited for years. And every day he delayed telling Claire, the secret became less like protection and more like betrayal. The emergency board meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. From the maintenance corridor outside the executive conference room, Gavin watched directors arrive one by one with tight expressions and thick folders tucked beneath their arms. Nobody laughed. Nobody lingered. Whatever had changed inside the company had reached the people who usually controlled every conversation. When the doors finally opened, Claire stepped into the hallway looking more drained than he had ever seen her. Her assistant hurried over. "They've asked legal to pull every environmental report connected to the North Ridge project." Claire stopped walking. "Why now?" "I don't know." They wouldn't say. Gavin felt his pulse quicken. North Ridge. For the first time, the project wasn't hidden in a forgotten basement. It had reached the boardroom. Claire noticed him standing near the supply closet. You still have a minute? He nodded. She led him onto the rooftop terrace employees rarely used during the cold October afternoons. Wind carried yellow leaves across the concrete as the Chicago skyline disappeared behind low gray clouds. I don't usually talk about work with anyone, Claire admitted. I've noticed. She leaned against the railing. Something isn't right. He stayed quiet. The board suddenly wants documents that nobody has mentioned in years. Legal is reviewing old maintenance records. And this morning a reporter called asking questions about a project I've barely heard of. She looked directly at him. I hate feeling like everyone knows more than I do. The guilt settled even deeper inside Gavin. Because everyone didn't know more than she did. He did. And every hour he remained silent. He became one more person deciding what she deserved to know. What would you do, she asked softly, if you discovered someone you trusted had been hiding something important from you? The question landed with painful precision. He could have answered honestly. Instead, he asked, depends on why they hid it. What if they believed they were protecting you? Claire folded her arms against the wind. I'd still want the choice to decide that for myself. Neither of them spoke. Her answer echoed through him more loudly than anything she'd ever said. She wasn't talking about him. She couldn't possibly be. Yet she had unknowingly described the mistake he had been making from the day they met. A vibration broke the silence. Claire glanced at her phone. Her face tightened. It's another reporter. She rejected the call. They've been trying to reach me since yesterday. Before Gavin could respond, his own phone rang. The caller ID froze him. Evelyn Mercer. His mother. She almost never called. He stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Claire noticed. You okay? Just family. You should call them back. I will. He didn't. Not yet. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Gavin finally listened to the voicemail. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. Gavin, I know you're working inside the company. He closed his eyes. I also know why. A long pause followed. We need to talk before someone else forces this conversation. Please don't make the mistake of believing you have more time than you do. The message ended. No explanation. No anger. Only urgency. Gavin sat alone in the dark kitchen, replaying the voicemail again and again. How long had she known? Had she recognized his name on a contractor list? Had someone seen him in the archives? Or had she known from the very beginning and chosen to let him continue? The next morning the answer arrived before he even reached his cleaning cart. 2 security officers stood outside the archive entrance. The shelves that had once been left untouched were now sealed behind temporary access barriers. Every box connected to North Ridge had been removed overnight. Frank shook his head as he walked past. They cleaned the place out before sunrise. Where'd everything go? No idea. Gavin looked through the wire gate into the nearly empty room. The evidence he had spent years searching for had vanished in a single night. At that exact moment, Claire stepped out of the elevator with yesterday's newspaper folded beneath her arm. She stopped when she saw him. The front page carried one headline in bold black letters. Questions raised over decades-old safety records at Mercer Industrial. She slowly looked from the newspaper to Gavin. Neither of them spoke. But for the first time since they had met, it felt as though the quiet between them was no longer built on comfort. It was built on truths that were rapidly running out of places to hide. The newspaper story spread faster than anyone inside Mercer Industrial expected. By noon, television crews were parked across the street. Former employees began calling reporters. Retired engineers who had stayed silent for years suddenly agreed to interviews. The company could no longer hide behind locked archive rooms. That afternoon, Gavin walked through the main entrance for the first time without his cleaning cart. He wasn't wearing a business suit. He wasn't dressed like an executive. He simply wore dark jeans, a navy jacket, and carried a worn leather folder containing every note he had written over the past 5 years. Claire was waiting outside the executive conference room. You asked to see me, she said quietly. I owe you the truth. She studied his face. There was no hesitation left in him. My full name is Gavin Mercer. Her expression barely changed at first. Then she understood. Mercer, he nodded. Evelyn Mercer is my mother. The silence that followed felt endless. You knew this whole time? Yes. You let me believe you were just a janitor. Yes. You let me trust you. His eyes filled with regret. Yes. She looked away before speaking again. I could have handled the truth. I know. You decided I didn't deserve the choice. I thought I was protecting the investigation. No. Her voice trembled for the first time since they had met. You were protecting yourself. Those words hurt because they were true. He slowly handed her the leather folder. I never stole company records. I copied only what I personally observed. I refused to remove documents because I wanted the truth to survive legal scrutiny. She opened the folder. Inside were dates, maintenance schedules, witness names, engineering notes, and a handwritten timeline connecting every event Gavin had managed to verify without altering company evidence. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing manipulated. Only facts. Claire closed the folder. I believe you. He looked surprised. But believing you doesn't erase what you hid from me. It shouldn't. At that moment, the conference room doors opened. Board members, attorneys, and outside investigators entered together. Evelyn Mercer walked in last. She looked at her son for several long seconds. I'm sorry, she said. Not for losing control of the company. Not for the reporters. For years, neither of them could get back. Gavin answered quietly. So am I. The independent investigators requested every remaining archive connected to North Ridge. This time no one objected. Claire personally authorized full access, including records involving executive offices. If mistakes had been made, they would no longer remain buried because protecting a company's reputation could never be more important than protecting human lives. Several weeks later, the investigation continued. Responsibility would ultimately be determined by evidence, not assumptions. Some former executives faced questioning. Policies were rewritten. Independent safety oversight replaced old internal procedures. Gavin declined every suggestion that he take an executive position inside the company. I didn't come here to inherit a title, he told his mother. I came here looking for the truth. One chilly Saturday afternoon, he and Lily visited a small neighborhood park. As Lily chased pigeons across the walking path, someone sat beside him on the empty bench. Claire. Neither of them spoke immediately. Finally, she smiled. I've been thinking. He waited. The man I cared about wasn't the billionaire's son. She looked toward Lily, laughing in the distance. He was the father who fixed broken cartwheels instead of replacing them. The man who always rushed to pick up his daughter, and the man who couldn't stop searching for answers for the woman he loved. She turned back toward him. But if we're ever going to know each other again. She paused. It has to begin without secrets. Gavin nodded. No more secrets. She didn't reach for his hand. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Some things deserve time. Some things had to be rebuilt instead of repaired. As I look at their story from the perspective of someone simply watching their lives unfold, one lesson stands above everything else. A person's paycheck, job title, or family wealth should never decide how much respect they deserve. The janitor pushing a mop and the CEO leading a company carry the same human need to be seen, trusted, and loved. Judging someone as less valuable because they appear poor, wear a work uniform, or hold a humble job only blinds us to their character. Real dignity isn't earned through money. It belongs to every person from the moment they walk through the door. As the sun settled behind the trees, Lily ran back toward the bench and slipped one hand into her father's and the other into Claire's. For now, that was enough. Not a perfect ending. Not a fairy tale. Just three people choosing honesty over appearances and taking the first real step toward a future built on truth instead of assumptions.